Hey folks, Colin here from Something's Recording, and today I'm going to be showing you how to recreate the synth sound from Journey's Separate Ways, which is a Jupiter 8 for free inside of Studio One using their instrument Mai Tai. Okay, so we're doing a cover here of Journey's Separate Ways, and I wanted to get the exact synth sound from the record. Well, it's not perfectly exact because this is an unmixed track still, excuse me, but it's pretty close for recording purposes, okay, and using the free instruments inside of Studio One, okay. So here we have the finished recorded synth sound. I bounced it after I did all the MIDI recording off my keyboard, and then down here we also have the reference. So I will play you our synth sound first, and then we'll flip back and forth and we can compare it to the reference before we break down the different components of it inside of Mai Tai, okay? So here is our synth sound. Let me pull up the volume for you guys. Here we go. Let me disable this instrument so it doesn't fight with the video software. One more time, here we go. So that's our synth sound as we have it. Let's close these vocal folders here. We don't need these. And then we will compare it to the actual track, okay? So here's ours. That's the actual track. So it's pretty close right now for an unmixed track. So in mixing, we can add that little bit of mid-range punch they have, and we can scoop off some of that airy top end that we kind of have going on our synth. Okay, one more time we'll do a comparison, and then we will break down how we create this inside of Studio One's free instrument, Mai Tai. Okay, so one more time. So here's ours. Here's the record. So the record has a little bit more mid-range punch on that, and we could dial up, we'll talk about this inside of Mai Tai, we could dial up the punch knob a little bit. That's something you can adjust to taste. And we could pull back the low-pass filter inside of Mai Tai as well to cut off some of that top end that we have going. So one more time, we'll do one more comparison. You can see that top end I'm talking about on ours, and you can hear the extra mid-range punch they have going, the extra mid-range attack on the actual record. Okay, so here's the record. So you see they have a little bit more mid-range attack on theirs. And our highs are a little bit more exaggerated at the moment. But again, these are all things that can be fixed in mixing when the track is finished, okay? We still have to put drums on this track and finish comping the vocals. So let's break down how we can create this sound inside of Mai Tai, okay? So we'll enable this instrument. This is actually a preset I saved inside of Mai Tai. It's called the Separate Ways Jupiter 8. So here's Mai Tai, and we're gonna go over each section one at a time here so we can show you how we created this sound, okay? So we will start with we'll turn these guys off here, and we'll start with just the one oscillator. We could pull up our keyboard here, see how it sounds. So that's our first oscillator, okay? So it's set at 8 in terms of the octave, and we are cranking the spread up to 76. Okay, let me show you what that spread does if we pull that back. So that's what's giving us that 80s tone. It's pulling a little bit of the attack out, but it's also giving us that spread and that 80s kind of verbed out sound. It's a little bit smoother. And that's kind of what we're looking for there, okay? We're not changing the level, we're not doing anything with the tuning or anything else, okay? And we're leaving the pan dead in the center so it's a stereo image, okay? On to Oscillator 2 here. This is set again at 8 in terms of the octave. What we are changing here is we're doing a little bit of pitch, okay? We're using the fine-tune knob and we're putting it up 2, okay? So here's what those sound like together. Okay? First one by itself. Second one with it. So it's a little bit fatter, and that tuning gives it a little bit more width because they're not sitting on the same pitch, okay? Something you could consider adding is a little bit of noise. Let me show you what that sounds like. That's the default level setting, so you'd probably pull it back to somewhere in here. And you could change the color. That's something you can mess with, but again, that will add more top-end frequency. And with this preset we created here, we already have a little bit too much of that sizzly saw wave sound on top. It's something we're going to have to scoop out inside of mixing, or we'll talk about in the filter section here, okay? So the next section is the filter, okay? So what we are using is a 12 dB per octave low-pass filter, okay? So we're wiping off a little bit of the top end. Let's see where it's set here. It's actually not even pulled up. We're just using it at the turned on setting, which is at 20K. Okay, so let's. So here's without, and here's with. So it's getting a little bit louder, bear in mind, because we are using this punch knob to dial in some more attack and make it a little bit more aggressive. Because if you listen without it, it's pretty smooth sounding, and when you're hitting the notes, you're not getting any kind of attack, okay? So this punch knob, we're dialing it up, and we're getting that punch, we're getting that attack that we need to give the beginning of the note some definition, okay? But we still get that smoothness, that 80s kind of reverb synth sound on the back end, okay? The filter, again, is pretty subtle. We haven't pulled it down at all. It's sitting at 20K. That's the highest this filter can go. If we did pull it down, here's what that would sound like. We could set it about 15K. A little bit more. So if we played with this a little bit, we could probably get the sound a little bit closer to the record and wipe off a little bit of that sizzly top end. I left it in. It's not something I wanted to print to the track. I felt that's something I could take care of later on down the road in mixing with EQ. So moving on here, we're going to move to the LFO, just the first one. I'm not going to use both of them here. We are setting it to a saw type, and here's what that sounds like. So here's without, and here's with. Just adding a little bit of movement to the sound so it's not so consistent. Otherwise your ear gets used to it and you can kind of lose it in the track, okay? This gives it a little bit of movement just so it stays interesting to your ear. It's not something you get used to and kind of just disregard in the track. So our rate is set to 4 Hertz. We're not using any kind of delay or syncing it to the track or anything. That is it for that. Okay, we will move over here to the first envelope filter. We're not using the second one, we're not using the third one, we're just sticking with the first one. Okay, so our attack is set to 1 millisecond here. We have our decay set to, well, we see the little amazing ball of death there. Our decay is set to 2 milliseconds. Our sustain is all the way up so we can hold on to notes. And then our release is set to 15 milliseconds, okay? So it's a pretty fast release so we can let go of the note pretty quickly, okay? But that's what we're using our reverb and our modulation for, to make sure that when we let go of the note that quickly, it doesn't just cut off. We have that tail on generated by the reverb, and the modulation is smoothing those kind of cuts out, okay? So that's our envelope filter there. we will move on. I didn't turn off the modulation and reverb when we started off, but I will give you a comparison after we finish up here. So our modulation, we have it set at 31% here. So if this is our kind of our dry wet knob, our mix knob, which would be set at 31%. It's on chorus, so this is just a chorus. Again, just adds a little bit of movement, a little bit of width to the sound. Our delay is set to 4.1 milliseconds or 4 milliseconds. Our speed is 0.35 hertz, I believe. And then our width is cranked all the way up. We want to give the sound some width. It's the 80s, right? Everything has to be wide, drenched in reverb. So that's our width knob there. Our chorus, again, our speed, giving it a little bit more movement so the sound isn't too static. And then our reverb here, very important to this sound, of course. No pre-delay, dampening is all the way up at 100%. Our reverb is actually only set to 881 milliseconds, okay? I had it longer at first. I was shooting for something like 2 to 3 seconds to give it that bigger sound, but I found the smaller sound, the more I dialed up the punch, the further I had to dial back the reverb, okay? So we're using a shorter reverb, 881 milliseconds, just under a second here, and then it's at 50%, okay? So here's without the reverb. So the sound is very upfront, and it sounds like it's being gated, right? When you let go of it, it cuts off right away. So we click our reverb back on here, and it's gonna give our sound some tail and some depth to it, okay? And also another element of width. Okay, so we will turn all of this stuff off here, and we will just give you the sound by itself with the one saw wave on our first oscillator. You know, we'll even pull our spread off. So that's our plain saw wave, okay? This is where we're starting out. One saw wave. We will kick our spread on. So we go from that to this. A little bit of width, a little bit of movement. We turn our second oscillator on. So here's this one. So that's adding our second saw wave, again, tuned a little bit up, okay? Just gives them some differentiation. Okay, next thing we're adding is our filter. So that's our volume and our punch. And again, we're just taking off a little bit of that top end. Our first filter. So there's that movement we need to keep the sound interesting. We have our envelope filter here, and then let's turn on a modulation. So a little bit more movement, smoothing things out there, a little bit of depth, and then our reverb. Here's our big depth, our width, and our smoothing element. Makes things a little bit less aggressive. Okay, so there is how we're generating the sound, how we're creating the sound, crafting it inside of Mai Tai in Studio One. Again, a plugin that comes with the DAW, so this is not something you have to pay for after you have your DAW. Okay, free plugin inside of your DAW. And you can use it in other DAWs too. Most DAWs have some kind of synth like this where you can manipulate saw waves, okay? Easy, free way to create the separate waves, Jupiter 8 synth sound inside of Studio One. One more time, we will do a comparison between our track and the actual track, okay? So here's ours. So again, in mixing, I would just add a little bit more of that mid-range punch and try to emphasize that. We could also emphasize that attack with a transient designer or a compressor to bring that out a little bit in the track. And then we would probably pull back some of that high-end sizzle. But that's how we're recreating this instrument for the album that we are currently working on. I hope you guys got a kick out of that. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below and I will do my best to answer them. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.